Welcome to the Geekly. My name is Jules.
I'm Lex, and today we're talking about Doom Patrol, Gotham Season 5, and the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone. Let's start with the Twilight Zone. What could this episode possibly have been trying to tell us?
It's such a mystery. I mean,
subtlety. It could have had anything.
The thing is, though, is I don't really think it said anything about immigration.
No.
Basically, this woman, it turns out she's from a different dimension. She gets hauled off to a detention center and basically tortured and kept in isolation. She escapes. She goes back to her family. Her husband turns her in.
Yeah, I mean, it was about like multiverse theory, kind of, and they were from a different version of Earth where, it
was a different dimension.
Global warming had probably destroyed the whole thing.
And, it ended with them just carting her off. And, I mean, really, that's not a story.
No.
There was no plot arc. It wasn't even it just wasn't a happy ending. I'm on board for unhappy endings. They can
Absolutely.
work.
That would have been the sort of the cherry on the shit cake. It would have been if there was like a happy ending to this story. I have to say, I enjoyed this more than Not All Men, and I enjoyed this more than 6 Degrees of Freedom or something.
Yeah, 6 Degrees of Freedom.
But it's just that there is no real subtlety to this show. So it was an okay episode, but just again, I feel like I've got a concussion coming on from being kind of bludgeoned over the head with.
It's basically like the writers are getting up on a soapbox every week for an hour, and we all read the news. We know what's going on. We know that people in power are corrupt and doing horrible things, and presumably most of us are trying to fix that. There's no attempt at actual storytelling. It's just these kind of warning lessons, kind of like, fairy tales for young children. It's like, be good or they'll haul you off and you'll disappear forever. And that's the episode.
They start off because the kind of, what role was she?
She's like a housekeeper.
Yeah, the kind of housekeeper. Yeah, the housekeeper kind of role. She was Guatemalan. It was the idea that after 11 years of being in this family service, the mother, the family, and presumably the father as well, just didn't know her at all. She said,
and then at the same time, oh yeah, she's part of the family, but they don't know her kids' names or that she has a grandson or even which country she's actually from.
The mother said, we thought they deported you to Mexico, and she's like, I'm from Guatemala. And so it was that idea that we know someone that's going to be, in America, everybody knows somebody that could be maybe as close as they are to you, as much as you consider them family. They could be in trouble because of what's actually happening today. And they did the whole slight change where it was actually people here because they're from different dimensions, and like you said, there was no plot arc. It was just it was a real world story, and then they just thought, oh god, this is the Twilight Zone, isn't it? We're not writing for some kind of normal show. It should be like a third act switcheroo where they're actually from a different dimension. That'll do it.
It was like somebody in the writing room was just like, hey, what if we talked about undocumented migrants, but the kind of undocumented person was actually a pretty white woman instead? Wouldn't that be revolutionary? And it's not so much.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about last week, it was the Not All Men, but it was bits of Meteor that were turning these men into kind of, what they were being turned into. I need more.
Yeah, I mean, this could have been a really interesting story. It started off promising, kind of illustrating the difference between the housewife and the housekeeper, after the housekeeper got taken away, the housewife is played by Jennifer Goodwin. She takes her twin daughters to the store and, doesn't recognize the busker that's always there, doesn't know how to use the card machine, but her kids do, and they're very familiar with the setting. And later on, the housekeeper, they encounter each other in the detention center, and the housekeeper basically calls her on her bullshit. She's like, you don't know what country I'm from.
What are my kids' names?
Yeah,
I've wiped the shit and snot from your kids for 11 years.
Your kids speak Spanish because of me.
Yeah. They wanted plantains for dinner.
Yeah.
The mum's like, what the fuck are plantains?
Yeah, so I mean, she's had a huge impact on the children's lives, and yet the parents are just kind of totally oblivious to anything about her, and kind of exploring the privilege and power that white people have over immigrants and basically everybody else. That could have been a really interesting story, but there was just no plot.
No.
It didn't go anywhere, and it's a shame.
It was as if they were telling this story, and then at the end, the writer would walk on, hold a mirror up to the camera or something, but it's happening in your, it's happening beside you. These people, these people, to catch us out. But the most, you'd have to be living under a rock not to know, that this is happening everywhere, all around the world.
And I mean, they even used the caravan.
Yeah, I mean, and they mentioned the caravan this time. They used the expression "not all men" last time. They had the presidential kid playing golf. It's as if it's so obvious what they're saying already. They're trying to really tie it in.
They should just like come out, like have Jordan Peele come out and just say, "We are living in the Twilight Zone." Just kind of like do like a rundown of the news stories from the day. Like that's it. Just him kind of like reading out headlines and then the little Twilight Zone music at the end. I mean, that's basically what they're doing.
Honest question, how happy are you that it seems like every episode is very directly tackling a big current issue? There aren't any kind of, sci-fi, there aren't any kind of, I don't know what kind of, what I'm trying to say here, but this is a topic that's happening in real life. There isn't anything to kind of wow us, to kind of take us literally to like a different world. Everything is so current. Like you said, it feels like we're watching a kind of slightly skewed documentary on things that are happening in our world. When I watch a show like The Twilight Zone, I want to be transported away to kind of feel something a bit different.
Well, I don't have a problem with them tackling big issues. I mean, I like that in my entertainment, but
every episode.
I'd be fine with every episode.
Yeah.
The thing I don't like is that there's no attempt to frame it in any sort of narrative. Like, I mean, it's not something that you think about after the fact.
Yeah.
Like you kind of mull over and ponder and say, well, I never considered this issue from that perspective. It's very blunt, very heavy-handed. There's no subtlety, there's no nuance, there's no, character development, there's no plot arc. It's just a scenario that's like very, very kind of verbatim based on actual life, and they try to like throw in these kind of sci-fi elements like it's gonna fix it, but the fact is you need a story. That's what it is. It's an entertainment show. Sci-fi is notorious for framing really big issues in digestible ways, for people who may not have exposure to all of the different factors around a particular issue, or who are kind of like stuck in a certain way of thinking. Sci-fi has, since its inception, dealt with things like gender equality, racism, rich versus poor, ideas about how society is structured, colonization. I mean, these are all like really, really heavy subjects, but when you frame it in kind of relatable characters with a story that actually goes somewhere and has some sort of resolution, whether it's happy or not, it gives the viewer, reader, consumer a way of tapping into what's going on without being overwhelmed by like a lot of statistics and sometimes jargon, depending on like what the topic is. And I'm just disappointed. I think every episode has kind of started off well, but they've gotten too caught up in like hammering home the issues that are facing everyday Americans at the moment.
I think I agree with you. Sci-fi's great at giving like current events in a more like digestible way for the viewer to sort of take them in. I just think if this Twilight Zone isn't going to do that, and it's all fairly obvious, I'd rather there wasn't a big issue every week. I think I'd prefer that they balanced it out with, okay, this week we talk about colonization, the next week the main character meets death, this week we're talking about race relations, the next week, like that episode where the guy was sold a bottle of luck. Do you remember? It was like a quick draw, like a Western kind of thing. Next week we're talking about this, and then the week after, like an episode where it was like a skewed world where ugly people were beautiful and beautiful people were ugly, and she looked in the mirror and she was like this beautiful young woman, but in that world she was like hideous. So I would like it to be maybe balanced out more.
Those ideas we're talking about,
like
really big. I mean,
it's subtle, isn't it? You wouldn't know.
That's the difference. Is like, it's rather than having somebody kind of literally stand up on their soapbox and say immigrants are being dragged away to detention centers where they're treated horribly and or die in American custody. It's like, yes, we know that, and the people who are against it are against it, and you're preaching to the choir with them. The people who are for it, and you're never going to win them over by approaching them directly. You have to kind of be sneaky about it and tell them a story with a character they can identify with and sympathize with, and put that character in the situation. And so you have the people who support like getting rid of all undocumented immigrants, have them identify with somebody who's going through the same process that an undocumented immigrant goes through. But I guess it's like, the spoonful of sugar theory. For some people, you have to make these ideas and concepts more palatable before they'll take them in. For me, that's what the Twilight Zone should be doing, and it's not.
Yeah. I think that's basically what we need to say.
Right, so I thought last week was the season finale of Doom Patrol, but apparently it's this week. We had one more episode. I actually had a conversation with somebody on Twitter who really enjoyed the finale of Doom Patrol, and I was like, it was kind of meh. Last few minutes were good.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking of the Niles revelation at the end of last week. So I almost went back and said, I haven't actually seen it. I don't know what I'm talking about. Then I watched the episode and I was like, nah, my opinion stands.
So what you didn't like this one?
I mean, it had cool things in it. I liked seeing Ezekiel and Admiral Whiskers, and there were a lot of like callbacks to things that had happened in the season so far, and I mean that was kind of cool, but like the overall story just wasn't that interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting when he said he was reading the review and he said it ends with a whimper, and that was his moment where he decided to sort of do something a bit grander, and that's what it was. It was kind of a very stylistic kaiju fight between Ezekiel and the rat, and Cliff like running across their tongues when they were making out. But yeah, I mean, we had, what was it, like 13 episodes of kind of character development and growth, and then nothing really became of it.
We even, at the end of that 13 episodes, Mr. Nobody promised us that the next 2 episodes were going to be something, and it was just more of the same. It didn't feel like a season finale. It just felt like another Doom Patrol episode.
Yeah, I mean, it was a kind of situation where like the Thinker had always like shat on the group the whole way through. Obviously this is a lot lighter than that season of The Flash, but they hadn't got close to beating Mr. Nobody. And then we had this idea that they were going to have this final confrontation, and he was kind of sidestepped as the main villain.
They didn't actually go up against him.
No.
He was just sort of orchestrating stuff, and
they
then
were kind of working with him to defeat Ezekiel and Admiral Whiskers, and that was just a little bit disappointing. I like the flashbacks where we see Niles, and the whole point of the season and the whole point of him inflicting these tragedies on these people is to make them immortal, and to research immortality, because he wanted to live long enough to kind of help his daughter, or outlive his daughter or something.
I think outlive his daughter. He needed somebody to outlive his daughter for some reason, and we were never really given an explanation about that.
No, so he knew about the negative energy. He knew Larry was going to
he set everything up. Even Cliff's accident, like he orchestrated all of that. I mean, it was interesting to see like the little flashback things, but I was ready for some kind of mostly present day stuff, an actual sort of conflict, some sort of resolution. It didn't happen.
Yeah, all this negativity with Mr. Nobody, and they ended up kind of being on the same team. And this completely shocking revelation at the end of last episode about Niles basically destroying all of their lives. And at the end of the episode, they're all like friends again. Do you want to talk about the third act? They go to, now was it actually Danny Street? Because it made me worry that Danny Street is no more. There was a nuclear basically blast equivalent, and they all had to hide inside a killed cockroach to be able to survive it. It was a bit confusing.
It felt very disconnected in a lot of ways, this episode. Like things didn't all quite add up.
Yeah.
I still don't have a really good handle on Jane's various personalities, and to me, there doesn't really seem to be a huge amount of difference between each of them. There's just, like, you only know that she switches personalities because there's, like, this weird shimmer thing, and then supposedly she's somebody else, but, like, the speech patterns, the words that are used, the attitude, it all seems very the same.
And they went to Danny Street to rescue the daughter. You know that episode where the beard hunter went to find the daughter, and so went to find Niles? It was going down this big, like, elaborate staircase, and at the bottom there was like a Niles made of papier-mâché. That presumably is the doll hospital, but that seemed like a moment for like a horror film. And then the next thing you know, he's living on Danny Street, and nothing really became of that. So anyway, they went, found the daughter, all went into the cockroach, survived this kind of nuclear blast, presumably that the negative energy created. They all survived. Mr. Nobody and the Beard Hunter kind of didn't, or did. It's hard to tell at the end. And only a single brick is left at Danny Street, and that's kind of how it ends. Larry's normal size, they are all tiny.
Yeah.
It was the kind of final act that you'd expect from a show like this. Kind of crazy, off the wall, but you can't just throw explanation out the window. We need a bit of...
I mean, one of the great things about Doom Patrol is it's sort of very quirky, off the wall nature, but I think in some of the episodes they have leaned too far into that and expected the quirkiness to excuse a lot of things that it doesn't really. Because I mean, even if you're gonna have like this weirdly sort of off the wall bonkers world, it needs to have an internal logic that makes sense and is consistent, and I feel like that gets pushed to the wayside sometimes with Doom Patrol.
Okay, let's talk about Gotham Series 5.
I actually really liked this season. I mean, it's
weird, isn't it?
One problem, which is kind of my problem with Gotham altogether, but I wish this was the Gotham Gotham we got from the very beginning with, Detective Jim trying to restore order to an absolutely apocalyptic Gotham, starting with Bruce at kind of about 15, so by the time we get to season 5 he's about 20, and that's when he kind of takes on the cowl. We never know how old Bruce is. Like, in season 1 he's 12, we know that, but then...
Is he 12?
He's 12
okay.
when his parents die. I mean, like, in the various incarnations there's kind of an age range between like 7, 8 to 12, 13, but they specifically mention in season 1 that he is 12.
Okay.
And then, like, later they say that he's like a few years younger than Selena, who's 15. But then, in season 4 and season 5, well, in season 4 he's still in high school because the rich kids mention that he's being homeschooled, but he's drinking and womanizing and hanging out in clubs.
I was going to come on to that, but Selena doing this. Yeah.
I think some of it they can kind of get away with because Gotham is a sort of lawless place, but the fact that the adults in the world treat a 15-year-old like he is their equal,
yeah,
and that, like, Jim Gordon is constantly asking 15-year-old Bruce for advice and getting involved in cases and shit like that.
It's really weird. Why would GCPD consult with a kid?
They wouldn't.
It baffles me.
I mean, like,
he says to him, next time you want to help, just ask,
ask,
and we'll, like, bring you along
he's
to
like,
some
what,
kind
like
of crime.
17, 18 max at this point?
Is it you've earned a place here? It's crazy. And there's a moment as well where he says, I'll get the boat, you get Jeremiah, to this kid.
Yeah.
This, like, maniac running around with, like, weapons and stuff. And Gordon's like, I'll get the boat with fireworks, you take down Jeremiah.
The thing is that, like, he doesn't know that Bruce has been training and all of this stuff with Alfred. To him, Bruce is just this spoiled rich kid. So yeah, that has bothered me throughout the series. The other thing that bothered me is that there's 3 things, and I'm finding more and more things. Yeah, they recast Selena for the final episode. Like, what the fuck?
Because I kind of expected that,
Bruce,
to be honest.
Bruce wasn't.
His voice was aged up, but he wasn't really in it.
He
just had the little bit of face around the cowl, but I completely expected them to do that, yeah.
It pissed me off.
Did it? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, she's been there just as long as he has. She deserved to be in, like, the final episode, and it wouldn't have been that difficult to, like, age her up a little bit. I mean, if they can make Robert Downey Jr. look like he's 20, they can make Selena Kyle look like she's 25.
Well, I mean, they made Chris Evans look like he was 100 and
exactly.
however old he is.
Exactly. I mean, it's very possible to age up characters. I mean, Arrow has been doing it with everybody except for Felicity for like a year.
I mean, I was going to say they had a 10-year time jump in this. Nobody aged. Except Selena, who aged into a completely different human being.
And Jim had like a mustache for a minute. I didn't think episode 12 was necessary. Episode 12 was just fan service. That was it.
Yeah.
Like, nothing happened in it. There were no stakes. There was no plot. It was basically just an hour of Batman arriving in Gotham.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think if I was to redo Gotham from the ground up, and the reason this series worked so well is it was revolved around GCPD. So I probably would have, I probably would have created a show called GCPD, and it would have been mostly about Jim, coming in as a rookie, building up and becoming commissioner. And what I would have done is I would have had Bruce leaving on episode 1, and whenever the final episode happened to be, 5, 6, 7 seasons, the episode end, he would have come back on that episode. So Bruce Wayne would have not been in the show at all.
Yeah, because I mean, what ended up happening was they started focusing more and more on Bruce and Alfred and less on what Jim was doing, when like the entire premise of the show was this is going to be Gotham before Batman and following the career of Jim Gordon, except we didn't really do that. The first season was kind of good with Jim as a rookie kind of coming into Gotham and dealing with corruption and trying to be kind of a force for good and seeing his morals compromised a lot. But as the series progressed, it just got more and more about Bruce making decisions and Jim being like, yes sir, okay, we'll do whatever you say.
Yeah, I've got to be honest, I would say the weakest element of Gotham has been Bruce and everything they've done with Bruce. I think it's unfortunate that I would consider the actor to be quite wooden. I don't really enjoy what he's kind of offering.
All of the parts that he has played have been very sort of unemotional.
Yeah.
And you could see when they had Bruce when they tried to have Bruce kind of go off the rails, it was not believable. it felt like he was forcing every second of that.
I think he played his own evil twin at one point, and it was so similar. Again, there was no kind of, you wouldn't really know anything was different. I think Selena didn't for quite a while. He's just always really bothered me, and I think it was a bit unbelievable where, even in before he became Batman, when he's still the kid in series 5, you'd see these montages of people being like abducted in the darkness, presumably by him, and you mirrored that with him talking to Selena and kind of weirdly being overbearing with her, like trying to control her and kind of trying to change her as a human being, and being a really awkward teenager. So I never believed that whatever he was doing with Alfred, he was becoming this kind of guy that could be taking out these armed thugs, with like his fists and stuff. But yeah, I think I would have just not had Bruce in the entire thing. I'd have revolved around GCPD.
They tried to bring the Batman story into it too much, and Bruce was just way too young. I mean, we talked about it before, that a lot of the villains that we would have thought were contemporaries to Bruce were suddenly like 10, 20 years older than him.
Yeah. What did you make of the Selena and Bruce relationship this season or throughout the whole show?
I think it went back and forth too much, and because Selena went bad for like an episode, and then nothing was ever made of it again, and all of a sudden she and Bruce were best friends again.
Yeah.
And that seemed to happen a lot, where they would like have a big falling out, and then he would show up, or she would show up, and it would just go back to like kind of the status quo with this sort of almost antagonistic partnership.
She's been at odds with Bruce for a lot of the show, and even in this final season, they were kind of at odds quite a lot. And the fact that she would run after his plane, I just thought kind of went against everything we've kind of been taught against the characters. And so when they met up 10 years' time, there was this kind of antagonism between them, and that was how they were saying that kind of the start of their adult relationship would begin. Not relationship, but them knowing each other in their adult life. I just think they were again forced upon us. I wouldn't have probably had Selena Kyle in it either if I could start the show again.
That's kind of the point I was trying to make. Like, we didn't need to see all of the Batman villains. It should have just been like a cop procedural that happened to take place in Gotham and followed Jim Gordon, and we had different villains. We didn't need all of Batman's villains, and just kind of left it for later, because all of the villains felt like they were being crammed into like earlier stories than they should have been.
Yeah, I mean, this is 100 episodes-ish, Gotham. I can't think of a single villain that hasn't really been in it, except maybe Man-Bat. People have been thrown in willy-nilly, given very small arcs. I mean, Ivy was in this season. I don't think we really needed her in this season. Nisra Al Ghul, like a kind of third act. It was me, not just some random woman. The guy becoming Bane. I just felt they were doing things for the sake of doing them towards the end. I think Scarface, the puppet, I only know from the animated show, but as a kid it was one of the most intriguing kind of C-list enemies to me, and for him to be in for like 15 minutes of one episode, I kind of think that was one of the main things that Gotham did wrong. Kind of villains found themselves by the end of season 2. There was no kind of grander arc. They were these people immediately. A cop procedural where you deal with like low level people, even Ed Nygma before being the Riddler, or Penguin if you had to. But I just think
the only one I think should have been in there, or would have been acceptable in there, was Penguin, because he is like 20-30 years older than Bruce.
Yeah.
With a city like Gotham, I mean, they had a lot of things they could have played with. And a lot of new villains they could have come up with without.
Jerome was in this season. Again, I don't really know why. He kind of has this obsession with Bruce. You complete me, we're the same two halves of the same coin or something. I don't know why he's obsessed with young Bruce. It's probably said in season 3 or 4 or something, but that was just a frustration.
I think the strength of the Joker is his sort of ambiguity and mystery, and anytime they try to pin down and say this is where he came from, he immediately becomes less interesting.
Don't know why we were giving him in this season. I'd rather he just wasn't in, to be honest. What walks in, Bruce, we're linked and all that, tries to recreate, was it Murder Alley or something? Crime Alley? Yeah. Rips actually Jim and Lee out of a storyline that I was really enjoying, the other storyline. I thought they were really good in this season. Just the one thing I'll remember Gotham for is just too much convoluted, storyline on top of storyline on top of storyline. A thing they don't do well is balancing a big cast. You sometimes can have 4 competing storylines going in one episode, and it's just too much. The one thing Gotham does do that's smart over the last couple of seasons is breaking into like 11 and 11, having kind of 2 story arcs in one season. But it kind of ruined it, I think. We've had the Joker story, we've had Jeremiah, we've had Jerome, we've had most of the kind of Joker origins. the show creators have had their cake and eaten it. You know, we've been given every possible variation. We had the Ace Chemicals one now. Yeah, I didn't really enjoy anything they ever did with the Joker. And he was just an annoyance in this episode, or this series rather. They just diluted what was a good storyline.
For me, like, the ideal Gotham would have been kind of, you know, like this apocalyptic, chaotic Gotham that we get in season 5, but with Jim Gordon coming in as a rookie detective, like, kind of trying to put order back in the streets or whatever, and sort of follow him through his progression from rookie detective to commissioner. And then at the end, kind of at the very end, the like last episode would be the first time the Joker gets introduced, and not even like in the last 5 minutes, just to kind of like, you know, like the ha 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 thing on a wall somewhere, something like that, an allusion to the fact that the Joker is there, and an allusion to the return of Batman, and that kind of been it.
I will say that I've always loved Penguin and Riddler in this show.
They are a great pair.
They're kind of the beating heart of this show. I've often thought great chemistry between them. Just love to see them do what they do. Kind of frenemies. I love the moment where they kind of hugged each other with knives behind each other's backs.
That was such a great moment.
Yeah. I like that he went kind of Jim Carrey long hair, Enigma in Arkham, and kind of the whole idea of the submarine was just such a crazy idea. Ed had just built this submarine. But yeah, I mean, if there were two characters, I think the episode 12, like you said, it complete fan service, but what they did was that they handpicked out every character that ever worked, I think, in the show, and they were the only people that were allowed there. It was nice to see them in the future kind of still being friends. One sprung the other out of prison, or maybe not, as the case turned out. They had good chemistry. What did you think of the fact that Jim, again, there were probably people who wanted him to end up with Lee, probably people wanted him to end up with Barbara, had a kid with Barbara and married Lee, which made me think of Game of Thrones, where everybody gets what they want. They try to give us both endings.
I kind of like that he ended up with Lee. Their arc over the various seasons, and sort of like together, then, you know, being on opposite sides, and then kind of finally coming together again. And Lee's sort of trepidation about that, you know, at one point he says to Alfred, you know, what am I getting myself into here? Like, should I really be doing this? So I thought like that element of it was well done. Gordon and Barbara were always kind of a bit weird. I feel like they kept making Barbara do things for like shock value, but they wanted to still kind of keep her redeemable for Jim at the same time. So they were sort of playing both sides of the fence with her, and it didn't really work out.
And then there was that crazy time where she died.
Did she die more than once?
Possibly. Quite possibly. I
know that every season she came back with a brand new haircut.
I was about to say that, yeah. I've always found it strange how Gotham, if it's good or bad, but it always kind of, people do die and people do come back in Gotham. I mean,
Nobody stays though.
Ed was frozen for like 6 months or something in the middle of an ice block. I like that he ended up with Lee. They really foreshadowed Barbara's death, I thought, throughout the season. And there was a weird moment where Lee was like, the way she was talking with, I think it was with Alfred, he was like saying, "You're going to be a mother." Like, do you want to be help raising this child? As if Barbara like didn't exist.
That conversation, I was sitting there thinking, like, he's talking to her like she's the one who's pregnant, and not that, like...
I knew the kid, if it was a girl, was going to be called Barbara, and that again made me think that she was going to die. So I probably could have been okay with her maybe dying and the kid being called Barbara Lee.
Yeah, I mean, I found the fact that like she named her own daughter Barbara.
Yeah, and he's like, "Oh, what are we going to call her?" And she's like, "Barbara," and Jim's like, "Oh, okay." Yeah, it was a bit peculiar.
Yeah, I mean, like, I expected her to, like, you know, be pregnant, have the kid, dies kind of shortly after birth, and either Lee or Jim is like, you know what, we're gonna name her Barbara after her mother, and...
Yeah. So we've got Batman, we've got, I think, Dick Grayson, and we've got Barbara Gordon now. So the whole...
Can we have Dick Grayson?
We did have Dick Grayson. I think we had the Flying Graysons episode at some point. So that little trinity are out in the world now. It'll never be realised on TV, but they are out there in the world. That's why I knew the kid would be called Barbara. But yeah, probably the best series of Gotham. It's a backhanded compliment because the bar is fairly low. But yeah, this would have been a better show. Remove the Jerome stuff from this season, it would have been an even better season, I think.
Alright, that's all for this week. You can find us on Twitter at GeekNerdPod, Facebook /The Geekly, and on Patreon /GeekNerd. We have our first watch along episode for our patrons. It's available at the $1 tier and up, and we're planning on doing some more shortly. I think Shaun of the Dead is going to be our next film, and potentially, if I can twist Jules' arm a little bit, maybe some Firefly.